I never imagined the sound of a sledgehammer hitting stone could echo so loudly in my chest as it did in that square. It was as if each shard of plaster that flew from the statue of the Virgin Mary also tore a piece from my soul. There, before hundreds of people, with cameras broadcasting live to the entire city, I became the man who destroyed a sacred symbol. But what nobody knew, what even I didn't understand at the time, was that by breaking that image, I was trying to break the invisible chains that had bound me for decades. And the most incredible thing of all, it was a 9-year-old girl, my own granddaughter, who showed me that some things, when broken, can become even more sacred. Let me go back to the beginning of this story, because it didn't start that March day in Our Lady of the Water Square. In fact, it began much earlier, on the cold mornings of my childhood, when my grandmother Conception dragged me to the 6 o'clock Mass. I was August Ferreira da Silva, a 6-year-old boy who preferred playing in the backyard dirt to kneeling on hard wooden pews, listening to words I didn't quite understand. But Grandma Conception didn't make exceptions. God is everywhere, Augie, she'd say, but in church he hears us better. My mother had left me in her care when I was only 3. My father had disappeared before I was even born, and my mother had her own demons to face. Grandma Conception became my whole world, a small woman with graying hair always pulled back in a tight bun, who smelled of lavender and spoke to God as if he were her closest neighbor. Our house was a living altar, images of saints in every room, rosaries hanging at the head of the beds, and in the center of the living room, on a round table covered with an embroidered lace tablecloth, a small image of the Virgin Mary that she had inherited from her own mother. Every day before we left for church, Grandma would light a candle before that Virgin and whisper prayers that I unintentionally memorized. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. I would stand there, watching those plaster eyes observe me, and I felt something strange in my chest. It wasn't fear, it wasn't love. It was as if that image held secrets I wasn't yet ready to understand. The Sisters of Charity School was my second home until I was 15. There, among white walls decorated with crucifixes and more images of the Virgin, I learned math, English, history, and above all that there was an order in the world that should not be questioned. Sister Teresa, my favorite teacher, always said that God had a plan for each of us, and that our only function was to accept that plan with humility and faith. For years I believed that. For years I was the obedient boy Grandma Conception wanted me to be. But things started to change when I entered engineering school. It was as if I had gone from a black and white world to one of vibrant colors. Professor Mark, my mentor in advanced calculus, was unlike anyone I had ever met. Tall, with a gray beard and eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances, he didn't speak of God as the solution to all problems. He spoke of science, of reason, of how human knowledge could transform the world. August, he said to me one afternoon after class, you have the potential to be more than just an engineer, you have the potential to be a leader. But true leaders don't wait for miracles, they build their own miracles. It was around this time that I began to question everything I had learned. It wasn't sudden, it was a slow and painful process, as if I were peeling the layers of an onion that made me cry with each new revelation. I began to notice contradictions in Sunday sermons, to question why God allowed so much injustice in the world, to become irritated with the passivity with which people accepted their living conditions as God's will. When Grandma Conception fell ill in my 3rd year of college, I spent months praying before that same Virgin in the living room, begging for her healing. She died one July morning, holding my rosary between her fingers, whispering a last Hail Mary that was lost in the air along with her last breath. It was there before her coffin that I felt for the first time a deep anger towards those plaster eyes that had witnessed so many unanswered prayers. But I kept that anger deep in my chest, because I wasn't yet ready to confront it. After graduation, I built a solid career as an engineer, married Clara, a beautiful and intelligent teacher who shared my more pragmatic view of the world, and we had a daughter, Helen. Life seemed to have found its natural rhythm. I worked on large infrastructure projects, saw entire cities transform with bridges, roads, and buildings that I helped design. There was immense satisfaction in seeing the concrete result of human work, without having to attribute anything to supernatural forces. It was Helen who brought me back into direct contact with faith. When she had her first daughter, my granddaughter Martha, something in her changed. Maybe that's what happens when we become mothers, an instinctive need to seek protection for those we love in every possible force. Helen started going to church again, taking Martha to Sunday Mass, teaching her the same prayers that Grandma Conception had taught me, and Martha, my little granddaughter with big curious eyes, developed a special relationship with the statue of the Virgin Mary in Our Lady of the Waters Square. Every morning, before going to school, she made a point of stopping by the park to say good morning to Our Lady. I accompanied her sometimes, and I would watch this 6, 7, or 8-year-old child talking to a stone statue as if it were her best friend. "Grandpa," she asked me once, "why don't you ever talk to Our Lady like I do?" The question caught me off guard. How do you explain to a child that you've lost the ability to believe in conversations with stone images? Politics entered my life almost by chance. Some people in town, impressed by my work as an engineer and my public speaking skills, suggested I run for city council. The city needs practical people, August, people who understand how things really work. The idea appealed to me. I had projects, ideas to improve the urban infrastructure, to bring more economic development, to make our town less dependent on empty promises and more focused on concrete results. My campaign for city council was a success. 4 years later, I ran for mayor on a platform of pragmatism and progress. I won by a comfortable margin, but I soon discovered that governing a town wasn't as simple as designing a bridge. There was resistance, ingrained traditions, interest groups that saw any change as a threat, and at the center of much of this resistance were always the same figures: priests, religious leaders, people who invoked Christian tradition to justify backwardness and complacency. If you watching this account feel there's something familiar in this struggle between progress and tradition, between reason and faith, please subscribe to the channel. There are many other stories like this that need to be told, stories of ordinary people who find themselves in the midst of conflicts far bigger than they ever imagined. It was during my second term that things really started to heat up. I had proposed an ambitious urban revitalization project that included the renovation of several public parks. The idea was to modernize the spaces, create more recreation areas, install exercise equipment, and improve lighting. But when we got to Our Lady of the Waters Park, we encountered fierce resistance. The statue of the Virgin Mary, which had been there for over 50 years, would be preserved, but it would be moved to a less central location, making way for a modern playground and an outdoor gym. The reaction was immediate and visceral. Father Jonas, the vicar of the local parish, called a public meeting that packed the school gymnasium. "They want to erase our history," he shouted into the microphone, his white cassock billowing with indignation. "They want to take Our Lady out of the heart of the town to put what? Gym equipment? Plastic toys? They're turning the sacred into the profane." I tried to explain, with all the patience I could muster, that there was no intention of disrespecting anyone's faith. The statue would be preserved, just relocated. But I realized I was speaking to a crowd that didn't want to hear rational arguments. They wanted symbols. They wanted confirmation that their beliefs were more important than any modernization project. It was that night, driving home after the tumultuous meeting, that the seed of anger I'd been harboring since Conception's death began to sprout again. Clara noticed my agitation. "August, you're letting your emotions get the better of you. It's just a political issue. Find a middle ground and move on." But I couldn't. Something deeper was happening there, something beyond a simple dispute over the use of public space. Over the following weeks, the controversy grew. Religious groups organized vigils in the park, with signs asking to save Our Lady. University students, on the other hand, began to show up with banners defending the secular nature of public space and the separation of church and state. The town was polarized, and I found myself at the center of this polarization without quite knowing how I'd gotten there. It was my granddaughter Martha who brought the issue to a personal level I wasn't prepared to face. One Saturday afternoon, she came to visit me at home, as she always did, but this time she was serious, with a worried expression that didn't suit her 9 years of age. "Grandpa," she asked, sitting on my lap as we watched cartoons, "is it true that you're going to take Our Lady away from the park?" The question hit me like a punch in the stomach. "Not exactly, my dear. We're just going to move her." "But why?" "She likes being there. I talk to her every day before school, and she always listens to me. If you move her, how am I going to find her?" At that moment, looking into those innocent and confused eyes of my granddaughter, I felt a mixture of tenderness and irritation that almost choked me. Tenderness for the purity of her childlike faith, irritation at how that faith was being used to manipulate even children. "Martha," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "Our Lady isn't really there. It's just a stone statue. God, if He exists, is everywhere. He doesn't need a special statue." Her face crumpled in a way that broke my heart. Tears began to roll down her cheeks. "Grandpa is saying Our Lady doesn't exist." The question left me speechless. How do you explain to a child the complexities of faith and disbelief? How do you tell your granddaughter that her grandfather had lost the ability to believe in miracles without destroying the magic of her world? Helena arrived just then to collect Marta, and immediately sensed something was wrong. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of my life. "Dad, you have the right not to believe in anything," she said, holding Marta, who was still softly crying. "But you don't have the right to destroy other people's faith. Especially you don't have the right to confuse an innocent child with your own unresolved issues." Unresolved issues. The phrase echoed in my head for days. What unresolved issues? I thought I had it all figured out. Religion was superstition, faith was complacency, progress demanded that people stop waiting for magical solutions and start working for real ones. But was it really that simple? The political pressure continued to mount. Religious groups from other towns started arriving to support the defense of Our Lady. Opposition politicians saw an opportunity to undermine me and began to fuel the controversy. Television journalists appeared, transforming our small municipal dispute into a national issue about religious intolerance versus social progress. It was during one of these television interviews that I made the mistake that would change everything. The reporter pressed me on my position, implying that I was persecuting Christians. I lost my patience. "This antiquated image," I said, pointing to the statue in the background, "this stone Virgin Mary, places a veil of submission over our people. It reminds us to kneel when we should be standing, building our destiny with effort, science, and ethics." The words tumbled out before I could consider the consequences, but there was a brutal truth in them that I had been suppressing for years. That old anger, which had begun at Grandma Conception's coffin, finally found its voice. The reaction was immediate and explosive. The video went viral on social media. Religious groups called for protests. The political opposition called for my impeachment. But there was also support. Young people, intellectuals, people who felt suffocated by the religious conservatism of the region, saw in me a voice that finally expressed what they thought but didn't dare say. The situation reached a critical point when a well-known businessman, Antonio Moreira, who had been one of the biggest financiers of my campaign, appeared in my office with an unexpected proposition. "August," he said, placing a briefcase on my desk, "you've stirred up a hornet's nest, but you can turn this into a historic victory. The whole country is paying attention to what's happening here. If you deliver a definitive symbolic blow to this issue, you can become a national leader of the secular movement." He opened the briefcase and revealed a golden sledgehammer, obviously custom-made. "Destroy that statue, publicly. Show that you won't back down from superstition. I guarantee you'll have financial support for any future political project you want to undertake." I looked at that golden sledgehammer and felt something strange in my chest. It wasn't just the political opportunity that tempted me. It was the possibility of finally doing what a part of me had wanted to do since I was a child, to shatter those plaster eyes that seemed to judge me, to destroy that symbol of a submission that I had rejected but never fully overcome. "I need to think," was all I could say. That night, alone in my home office, I took out an old photograph I kept in a drawer. It was Grandma Conception, me at 7 years old, and baby Helena, all of us in front of the same Virgin statue in the square. It was a festive day, the feast of Our Lady of the Waters, and Grandma was radiant, holding my right hand and Helena on her left arm. I looked at the camera with that serious expression children make when they know they're being photographed for posterity. But there was something more in those child's eyes. There was confidence, security, the certainty that I was where I should be. When did I lose that certainty? When did faith turn into revolt, and revolt into anger? The next day dawned gray, with heavy clouds promising rain. I had decided during the night I would hold the rally in the square, but I wouldn't destroy the statue. I would try to find a way to reconcile the two positions, to show that it was possible to respect tradition while embracing progress. But when I arrived at the square and saw the crowd that had gathered, I realized that there would be no middle ground. On one side, hundreds of people holding rosaries, singing religious hymns, many of them kneeling on the cold stone. On the other, young people with secular signs, some even with provocative phrases like "religion is the opium of the people," and "enough superstition." Between them, journalists, television cameras, politicians from other parties waiting to see how I would handle this. I climbed onto the makeshift platform and tried to talk about dialogue, about mutual respect, about the possibility of building together a city that honored both tradition and progress. But with every word I spoke, I realized I was losing both sides. The religious saw me as a coward who retreated in the face of pressure. The secularists saw me as a politician without the courage to see his convictions through to the end. That's when I saw Antonio Moreira in the front row, holding that briefcase. Our eyes met, and he made a discreet but clear gesture. It was now or never. I looked at the statue of the Virgin Mary. 50 years of sun and rain had worn away some details, but the eyes were still clear, still seemed to observe me, with that serene and mysterious expression that had bothered me since childhood. For a moment, it was as if I were again that 6-year-old boy who preferred to play in the dirt than kneel on wooden benches. For a moment, it was as if my entire life, college, career, politics, family, had been just an escape from those eyes that knew all my secrets. This antiquated image, I began, repeating the words I'd spoken on television, but now with a force and conviction that surprised even me. This stone Virgin Mary places a veil of submission over our people. The crowd stirred, some shouted, others fell silent. It reminds us to kneel when we should be standing, building our destiny with effort, science, and ethics. I stepped down from the podium and walked toward where Anthony was standing. I took the golden sledgehammer from the briefcase, feeling its cold solid weight in my hands. The crowd parted, opening a corridor to the base of the statue. Each step I took echoed in the square, like a war drum. I stopped before the Virgin Mary and raised the sledgehammer. For a second, the whole world seemed to stop. There was no sound, no movement, just me and those plaster eyes staring at me one last time. And it was in that second of absolute silence that I heard a small familiar voice shouting from the crowd, "Grandpa!" No, it was Martha. She had managed to escape her mother and was running toward me, her face red with tears, her arms outstretched as if to protect the statue. "Grandpa, please, don't hurt my friend." Time resumed its course like an avalanche. Helen appeared behind Martha, trying to restrain her. TV cameras focused on the dramatic scene, the mayor, with a raised sledgehammer, his granddaughter crying at his feet, the crowd in absolute suspense. I looked down and saw those large, innocent eyes of my granddaughter, the same eyes that had once asked why I never talked to Our Lady as she did. And there, in that impossible moment, everything became clear to me. It wasn't the statue I wanted to destroy, it was the pain of having lost Grandma Conception without being able to save her. It was the frustration of discovering that the world was more complex and cruel than the nuns had taught me. It was the anger of having grown up in a broken family, in a world full of broken promises. It was the revolt against a God who seemed deaf to the prayers of good people. But looking at Martha, crying at my feet, I understood something that had eluded me all these years. Her faith wasn't the same faith I had rejected. She didn't talk to the statue out of submission or fear, but out of love and trust. For her, that stone image represented protection, affection, the certainty that someone cared about her small daily fears and joys. To destroy that would be like killing innocence, like robbing a child of the magic of believing that the world can be a safe place. I lowered the sledgehammer slowly. The crowd collectively held its breath. I knelt in front of Martha and took her in my arms. "I'm sorry, my dear," I whispered in her ear. "Grandpa almost made a very big mistake." But even knowing I had made the right decision, I knew I couldn't just put away the sledgehammer and pretend nothing had happened. Hundreds of people were there waiting for a resolution. The whole country was watching. I had to do something. I had to say something that made sense of it all. I stood up, still holding Martha, and looked at the crowd. "You came here today expecting a war," I began, feeling my voice tremble with emotion. "Expecting me to destroy a sacred symbol for you, or to betray my convictions to please the majority. But what I discovered today is that there doesn't have to be a war between faith and reason, between tradition and progress." I pointed to the statue of the Virgin. "This image has been here for 50 years. It has seen generations of children grow up, families form, people find comfort in difficult times. Who am I to destroy that? But also," I continued, looking to the other side of the crowd, "who are we to think that faith needs to be static, that tradition means never changing anything?" That's when I had an idea that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than my rational mind, somewhere that had been touched by my granddaughter's tearful eyes, and the distant memory of Grandma Conception, whispering prayers in the dark. "I'm going to make you a proposition," I said, putting Martha down, but holding her small warm hand. "Let's keep Our Lady exactly where she is, but let's also build, next to her, a modern sculpture, a man and a woman, holding hands, looking toward the future. Two symbols together, one representing the faith that sustains us, the other representing the courage that moves us forward." The idea sounded strange even to me as it left my mouth, but something in the crowd's reaction told me I had touched something true. People on both sides began to murmur, exchange glances, consider the possibility. Father Jonas, who had remained silent throughout the speech, approached the podium. For a moment, I thought he was going to confront me publicly, but when he got close enough that only I could hear, he whispered, "Perhaps God works in mysterious ways, Mayor. Perhaps he used your anger to remind us that faith without compassion is just pride." In the months that followed, the project of the Square of Reconciliation, as it came to be known, became a kind of national symbol. Artists from various parts of the country submitted proposals for the modern sculpture. Religious and secular groups worked together on the revitalization of the space. Martha, my little granddaughter, became a kind of unofficial ambassador for the project, appearing in news reports, explaining how Grandpa learned that you don't have to break things to make new things. But the real miracle, at least for me, happened one Sunday morning, a few months after all the controversy. I was passing through the town square when I saw Martha talking to the statue of the Virgin Mary, as she always did before school. Only this time, she wasn't alone. An older girl, maybe 12, was beside her, and the two seemed to be having a serious conversation. I approached discreetly and overheard Martha explaining to the other girl, "You know Our Lady doesn't do magic like in cartoons, but she listens when you're sad or scared, and that's already a pretty big kind of magic." The older girl, who seemed to come from a poorer family, judging by her simple clothes, nodded thoughtfully. "My mom says God doesn't exist, that it's just something for people who don't want to work." Martha was thoughtful for a moment, then said something that left me speechless. "I think God does exist, but not the way adults sometimes say. I think He exists when we take care of each other, when we don't fight, when we forgive." My grandpa learned that too, at that moment, watching my 9-year-old granddaughter teaching theology to an older girl, with a wisdom it took me 50 years to begin to understand. I felt something I hadn't felt since childhood, a profound peace, the feeling that I was exactly where I should be. The modern sculpture was unveiled 6 months later, in a ceremony that brought together people from all the neighboring towns. It's a beautiful work, a couple holding hands, faces turned towards the horizon, serene yet determined expressions. It looked perfect next to the old Virgin Mary statue, as if the two sculptures were conversing across time about the mysteries of faith and human hope. Today, 2 years after that dramatic day in the square, I continue to be the mayor of this town. My relationship with religion is still complicated. I haven't returned to church. I still have more questions than answers about God and faith. But I learned something fundamental. The faith of other people is not my enemy, especially the pure and innocent faith of a child who sees in a stone statue a source of comfort and protection. Martha continues to talk to Our Lady every morning before school, but now she also stops in front of the modern sculpture and says a little prayer for progress with love. As she says, "Helen forgave me for the turmoil I caused, and our relationship is closer than ever." Clara, my wife, says I've become a wiser and less bitter man. Father Jonas and I developed an unlikely friendship. He teaches me about the history of human spirituality. I help him understand the practical challenges of public administration. We discovered that we have more in common than we imagined. We both want what's best for our community. We both believe in the importance of compassion and social justice. Sometimes, especially on quiet nights, when I can't sleep, I still look at that old photograph of Grandma Conception, baby Helen, and me as a child, in front of the Virgin, and I wonder what Grandma would think of all this. I think she would be proud to know that, in the end, her faith was not wasted. She planted seeds of love and compassion that took decades to bloom, but they bloomed in a way she probably never imagined. What strikes me most is how a situation that seemed so destructive transformed into something constructive. That golden sledgehammer, which should have been an instrument of destruction, ended up becoming a symbol of a lesson I'm still learning. We don't need to destroy the past to build the future. We can honor the traditions that shaped us while embracing the changes that make us grow. The town has changed too, not in the radical way I imagined at the beginning of my term, but in a deeper and more lasting way. People have learned to talk about their differences instead of just shouting at each other. Young and old meet in the square to discuss both practical infrastructure issues and philosophical questions about the meaning of life. The Square of Reconciliation has literally become a meeting place for different worldviews. I learned that leading is not imposing your vision on others, but helping people find common ground that allows everyone to grow together. I learned that faith and reason are not natural enemies, but companions on the human journey, in search of meaning and purpose. I learned that sometimes, the greatest transformations happen not when we break something, but when we decide not to break it. But mostly, I learned a lesson that I carry with me every day: never underestimate the wisdom of a child. It was Martha, with her 9 years of age, and her simple and pure faith, who taught me that destruction is not courage, it's fear.
True courage is finding ways to build bridges where others see only chasms, because in the end, I discovered that there's no real victory when some people have to lose for others to win. True victory happens when everyone grows together, when differences become complementarities, when what seemed irreconcilable finds its harmony on a deeper level of mutual understanding. And if a 9-year-old girl could teach me that, imagine what we can learn from each other when we stop trying to break what we don't understand and start trying to understand what seems different to us. The world needs more bridges and fewer hammers, more conversations and fewer confrontations, more Marthas and fewer golden sledgehammers. This is the lesson I carry with me every day, and which I hope to continue teaching through my example, as mayor, as a grandfather, and as a human being, constantly learning about the mysteries of faith, hope, and love.